doing products like Apple's products, sometimes to a designer it's like, oh, that's just a box, right? Or that's just a filleted square. And it seems almost easy to do, but to get it produced at that kind of perfection is it's what most companies don't have the resources to pull off. When we are gunning for possibilities, it feels initially a bit frivolous until users get used to that new provision. Then when you take that away, now it becomes problematic.
Is it up to the business side to determine, like, find a balance between something that is marketable and sellable, attractive in the sales space, versus and finding that balance with something that is appropriate in the home setting? Or is it like the responsibility of the designer to fight for designing for something that's appropriate for the actual use case?
Sounds like it's everybody's job, right? The designer always thinks that, like, maybe the it's a perpetual struggle of this designer feeling, why the client like that, why is the marketing team always asking us to make all these things so that, like, they can shout better? But at the same time, the realities are, if the object doesn't really shout, it doesn't get sold. So I always think that it's both the responsibility of a designer to try to influence and educate the clients or maybe even users, but I think brands and what they decide to do have an important role to play here. There are some brands that successfully do this, right? Like MUJI is able to, over time, through its brand and philosophy, educate and help people prefer, right, a product that is not shouting at you. But most others are not doing that. And this is a huge effort on their part, right, to educate customers and to have a better discernment in terms of what they choose to put in their homes. Yeah. So it's a lot of work on everybody's part in order for this kind of thing to work. And that's why you always see that, like, hey, this thing the designer will buy, this one normal people won't buy. So that's always the thing, right? But that's because the designer is maybe slightly more attuned to, like, buying things that are less designed, right? And then the public yet is like, I got to buy that because it's calling out to me at the shelf. Yeah.
I do see slowly the shift, though, towards the so-called designer-esque product. That I feel like it has become a bit more commonplace, like with brands like MUJI, right? And
Yes.
even Xiaomi.
Even Xiaomi, yes.
Yeah. And it's all, like, very clean and something that, like, oh, it looks very designerly, but actually it's very mass market and buyable with yeah. So I don't know. Yeah.
There is a shift, and I think that's because different companies are doing quite a lot of work in this area to slowly educate, right? Apple is doing it a lot. MUJI is doing it a lot. I think they play a big part. As well as maybe sometimes things just goes a bit in, like, cycles. People are getting a bit sick of all the highly shouting at you things, and then they kind of want to revert to a bit of a time of simplicity. Maybe at some point in time they get a bit bored and they want to kind of like, can we have a bit of interest, in this? For me, I always think that minimalism, for example, is not really a blind reduction, right? You don't just reduce it to, like, a sphere or a square, then it's minimalist. It's not. There's a geometry, right? I think it's about just getting to a point whereby it's enough, right? To delight, and no more, no less. So that's hopefully where we trend towards, right? In that swings of going a bit more expressive to a bit more subverted, right? Or not subverted, but subtle, right? We hopefully swing towards something that is calm, but not boring. Yeah.
I guess maybe, with this so-called minimalist products, right, and designing just enough, when something is just enough, then do you think that there's still space then for other products, like new innovations or new designs? When something is really, okay, it's designed to be just enough, then yeah, is there still space for creativity and innovation in the same, like, product
Well,
line?
doing the just enough is very difficult to do, So actually, usually when there's less to design, less to work with, you're dealing with nothing decorative that tries to catch your eye. It's all in balancing that proportions or that small little curve or even the texture, or even the edge, right? Or even the finishing, right? That causes it to feel nice, and that is actually a lot harder. Sometimes it's so hard that it's even beyond the designer. What I mean is this: it's easy for a designer to say, let's keep it really nice and neat, right? But to try to produce that in the factory is another challenge altogether, and that's why doing products like Apple's products, sometimes to a designer it's like, oh, that's just a box, right? Or that's just a filleted square, and it seems almost easy to do, but to get it produced at that kind of perfection is it's what most companies don't have the resources to pull off. So actually simple is very, very expensive to make. And the creativity shifts from decorating. It shifts from decorating to figuring out how to solve this so that it's makeable, right? Or how to invent new ways to make things so that these simple things can be derived.
So maybe in terms of the design process or approach, are there any key ingredients or key steps that you take as a designer in first approaching a project where you want to make products that people love? Like, are there any key steps you take?
Yes, I do have. Maybe I'll try to say some things that other designers might find relevant to consider. I started off maybe like a lot of designers trying to find rational anchors for the reason that we do something, right? And sometimes we're hoping that we can find like a problem that human beings face or pain point or frustration, and then it feels like that's where to begin to design something delightful for people. So I've done that for many years, and limited my processes to that somewhat, because it felt like only that was justified. But then I realized, after encountering more work and learning from more people, and maybe just the last 8-9 years, that the issue is users and even designers sometimes they don't see the problems that are not obvious, right? Meaning that they don't see possibilities, right? And many times when we are gunning for possibilities, it feels initially a bit frivolous until users get used to that new provision. Then when you take that away, now it becomes problematic. So I think for me, I try to start with that point where I will see what normally people gravitate to, even if it's an object that is not supposed to deliver that aspect, and ask myself if just an example might make this clearer, like a coffee machine, right? If you take a coffee machine and you try to figure out what's the pain point, right, then people will start to deal with things like drips, or like clarity of usage, and I think that yes, we can work on that, but sometimes actually some things are already evolved so much that they are quite good. You don't have to further push this. But if you ask another question, instead of going from pain point, you say, is a coffee machine social enough, right? Does it promote friends and friends drinking together, right? This is a dimension that you will never find by talking to people. Say, what's the problem you have with a coffee machine? And maybe it points to a new way to see such an object. And if we extrapolate to the future, whereby indeed there's coffee machines that are so good for friendship chats, right? Or like a shared cup, for example. Then now you take it away, now it feels like this coffee machine is a bit cold. So it's problems and possibilities are actually the two sides of the same coin. But for a start, like myself in the earlier years, and also like many other designers and students that we see, they may feel like a certain kind of assurance and confidence by sticking to what feels like rational, obvious problems. Okay, so that's where I would say I usually try to start first so that I don't fall into the usual, to me, boring approach.
From what you described, it sounds like kind of finding a thing that people don't know yet they miss.
Yeah. You have very sharp words. Yeah, I mean, it's also kind of that faster horses thing, right? It's back to this thing. You sometimes need designers to purposely play this role to ask the question. But we're not naive about this. When we ask these questions, many of the times the speculations is nonsense, lah. It doesn't land anywhere that's resonant with people. But I think it's a more interesting way to do things, and if you think enough in this area and explore enough, we could find ways that are potentially resonant, where it meets a latent need that is not very obvious.